In the dusty town of Millbrook, where the railroad tracks split the decent folks from the desperate ones, there lived a man whose kindness would become legend. His name was Thomas Brennan, and what he did one cold October night in 1887 would change not just his life, but the life of a woman the whole town had written off as lost forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind howled through Millbrook's Main Street, carrying with it the scent of dried leaves and the distant promise of winter. Thomas Brennan pulled his worn leather coat tighter as he walked past the flickering gas lamps that lined the wooden sidewalks. At 32, he was a man of simple habits and honest work, spending his days breaking horses for the local ranchers and his evenings reading by lamplight in his modest cabin on the outskirts of town. Thomas had arrived in Millbrook 3 years earlier, carrying nothing but a battered saddlebag and a reputation for gentling the wildest stallions without ever raising his voice or hand in anger. The townspeople respected him, though they found him peculiar. He attended church every Sunday, tipped his hat to every lady he passed, and had never been seen inside the Silver Dollar saloon that dominated the seedier end of Main Street. But tonight was different. Tonight, Thomas walked with purpose toward that very establishment, his boots echoing against the wooden planks with each determined step. The Silver Dollar stood like a beacon of vice in the darkness, its windows glowing amber with oil lamplight, the sounds of raucous laughter and tinkling piano keys spilling out into the night air. Above the main entrance, a hand-painted sign creaked in the wind, advertising cold beer, hot food, and friendly company. Everyone in town knew what that last part meant. Thomas paused at the batwing doors, his calloused hands resting on the worn wood. Through the gaps, he could see the familiar scene: cowboys and drifters hunched over card tables, their faces lit by the dancing flames of candles stuck in whiskey bottles. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sharp scent of cheap liquor. In the corner, an old man with missing fingers played a melancholy tune on an upright piano that had seen better days, but Thomas wasn't looking at any of that. His eyes were fixed on the narrow staircase that led to the second floor, where small rooms with thin walls housed the saloon's other form of entertainment. And more specifically, he was thinking about the woman he'd glimpsed through one of those upstairs windows 3 nights ago. Her name was Catherine Walsh, though most folks called her Kate. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair that caught the light like copper wire and green eyes that seemed to hold depths of sadness no young woman should carry. She'd arrived in Millbrook 6 months earlier on the noon stage, carrying a carpet bag and wearing a dress that had once been fine but now showed the wear of hard travel. The story everyone told was simple enough. She'd been abandoned by some traveling man who'd promised her marriage and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation in ruins. With no family to turn to and no respectable work available to a woman with her past, she'd ended up at the Silver Dollar, where Martha Goldstein, the saloon's madam, had offered her room and board in exchange for entertaining the paying customers. But Thomas had seen something different in those brief glimpses through the window. While other girls laughed and flirted with their clients, Kate sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes focused on some distant point beyond the walls of her small room. There was a dignity about her that the life hadn't yet managed to break, and it called to something deep in Thomas's chest. He'd grown up in a house where his mother, Sarah Brennan, had taken in laundry and sewing to make ends meet after his father died in a mining accident. She'd taught him that every person deserved respect, regardless of their circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest kindness was simply being present with someone in their darkest hour. Thomas pushed through the doors and stepped into the smoky interior of the Silver Dollar. Conversations died down as heads turned to look at him. He was known as a man who kept to himself, and his presence here was as unexpected as snow in July. "Well, I'll be damned," called out Pete Morrison, a local ranch hand who'd had too much To drink, look what the wind blew in. Thomas Brennan himself, gracing us with his holy presence. A few men chuckled, but Thomas ignored them. He walked straight to the bar where Martha Goldstein was counting the night's receipts. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair piled high and a dress that had been fashionable in Denver a decade ago. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, missing nothing that happened in her establishment. "Mr. Brennan," she said, looking up from her money with surprise. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" Thomas removed his hat and placed it on the bar. "I'd like to speak with you privately, Mrs. Goldstein, about business." Her eyebrows rose. "Business? What kind of business would a man like you have with a woman like me?" "The kind best discussed in private." Martha studied his face for a long moment, then nodded toward a small office behind the bar. "All right then. Follow me." The office was cramped and cluttered, filled with ledger books and empty liquor bottles. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls. Martha settled behind a desk that had seen better days and gestured for Thomas to take the chair. Across from her, "Now then," she said, folding her hands. "What's this about?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I want to pay for Kate's time, all of it." Martha's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "All of it? You mean for the evening?" "No, ma'am, I mean all of it. Every night, for as long as she wants to stay here. I'll pay her rate, plus extra for the room, plus whatever you'd normally take as your share." Now Martha leaned back in her chair, truly surprised. "That's a considerable amount of money, Mr. Brennan. And what exactly do you expect in return for this generous arrangement?" "Nothing more than conversation, ma'am. I just want to sit with her, talk if she's willing. Maybe read to her. Nothing improper." The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Martha had seen all kinds of men come through her doors, the lonely, the desperate, the cruel, and the kind. But she'd never encountered anything quite like this. "Mr. Brennan," she said slowly, "I'm not sure I understand. You want to pay premium rates just to talk?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you expect me to believe that's all you want?" Thomas met her gaze. Steadily. "Mrs. Goldstein, I've never lied to you or anyone else in this town. I'm not about to start now." Martha stood and walked to the small window that looked out onto the main floor of the saloon. She could see Kate sitting at a corner table with a traveling merchant who was trying to impress her with stories of his business dealings in Kansas City. The girl's smile was polite but distant, her attention clearly elsewhere. "She's not like the others," Martha said quietly. "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I can usually tell within a week whether a girl will make it or break. Kate... she's different. Stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. I can see that. Can you? Because if you're playing some kind of game, if you think you can come in here and save her like some knight in shining armor, you're going to end up hurting her more than helping her." Thomas stood as well, his hat still in his hands. "Mrs. Goldstein, I'm not trying to save anyone. I just think everyone deserves to have someone sit with them in the dark if they want company." Something in his voice made Martha turn around. She looked at this quiet man with his calloused hands and steady eyes, and for the first time in years, she found herself believing in the possibility of simple human decency. "Her rate is $5 a night," she said. "My cut is $2. If you want to guarantee her time exclusively, it'll be $10 a night, paid in advance." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out $70 and placed it on the desk. "That's for a week. If she's agreeable to the arrangement after that, I'll pay for another week." Martha stared at the money. $70 was more than most working men made in 2 months. "You're serious about this?" "Yes, ma'am." She scooped up the bills and tucked them into her dress. "All right then. But I'm warning you, if you cause any trouble, if you upset her, or if I even suspect you're not being honest about your intentions, this arrangement ends immediately." Understood? Understood. Good. Now she's finishing up with her current customer. Give me a few minutes to explain the situation to her. If she agrees, you can go up to room 7. If she does n single quotes d dot dot double quotes Martha shrugged. Well, you'll get your money back minus my trouble fee. Thomas nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mrs. Goldstein, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Brennan. Thank me if this works out the way you hope it will. As Thomas waited at the bar, nursing a whiskey he didn't really want, he could hear the murmur of conversation from the office, then footsteps on the stairs. A few minutes later, Martha emerged and nodded toward the staircase. Room 7, she said. And Mr. Brennan? Whatever your reasons for doing this, I hope they're good ones. Thomas climbed the narrow stairs, his heart beating faster with each step. At the top, a long hallway stretched before him, lined with doors marked with brass numbers. He found room 7 and knocked gently. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Come in, came a soft voice from within. Thomas opened the door and stepped into a small room furnished with a single bed, a washstand, and 2 chairs positioned near a window that looked out over the main street. Kate Walsh sat in one of the chairs, her hands folded in her lap, her green eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She was even more beautiful up close, but it was a beauty marked by hardship. Her auburn hair was pulled back simply, and her dress, while clean and well-maintained, had been mended in several places. But her posture was straight, her gaze direct, and Thomas found himself thinking of his mother's favorite saying, "A person's worth isn't measured by their circumstances, but by how they face them." Mrs. Goldstein explained your unusual request, Kate said, her voice carrying a slight Irish accent that spoke of childhood memories far from this dusty town. She said you want to pay for my time but expect nothing in return. Thomas removed his hat and took the chair across from her. That's right, Miss Walsh. I just thought you might like some company. Someone to talk with, if you're so inclined. Kate studied his face for a long moment. And if I'm not so inclined? If I'd rather sit in silence, then we'll sit in silence. Why? The question came out more forcefully than she'd intended. Why would you pay good money just to sit with someone? What's your real purpose here? Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the empty street below. I suppose, he said finally, it's because everyone deserves to feel less alone sometimes. And maybe because I've been alone long enough to know how that feels. Something in his tone made Kate's defensive posture soften slightly. You've been alone? My whole life, in one way or another. Lost my parents young, never had much family to speak of. I've got work and a roof over my head, but at the end of the day, it gets quiet. I imagine it gets quiet for you too. Kate's hands tightened in her lap. Quiet isn't the word I'd use for it. No, I suppose not, but lonely ... That might be the word for both of us. They sat in silence for a while, the distant sounds of the saloon drifting up through the floorboards. Finally, Kate spoke. I wasn't always this, she said, gesturing vaguely at their surroundings. I had a different life once, a better one. Would you like to tell me about it? She looked at him sharply, searching for signs of judgment or condescension. Finding neither, she relaxed slightly. I grew up in Boston. My father was a clerk in a shipping office, and my mother took in sewing. We weren't wealthy, but we were respectable. I was engaged to be married to a young man named David Morrison, a banker's son with good prospects. Thomas nodded, encouraging her to continue. But David wanted to see the world before we settled down. He convinced me to run away with him, said we'd be married in California and make our fortune there. I was 19 and thought I was in love, so I left my family and my reputation behind. Kate's voice grew bitter. We made it as far as Kansas City before he disappeared one night, taking what little money we had left and leaving me alone in a strange city with nothing but the clothes on my back. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly. "I tried to find respectable work, but word gets around quickly in small communities. A woman traveling alone with no references, no family. People assume the worst. And eventually, when you're hungry enough and desperate enough, you start to believe they might be right." The weight of her story settled between them like a physical presence. Thomas felt anger rise in his chest, not at Kate, but at the world that had taken a young woman's trust and used it to destroy her. "That man was a fool," he said finally. Kate laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A fool? He got exactly what he wanted. A few months of companionship with no strings attached. I'm the fool for believing his promises." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're not a fool for believing in someone. You're not a fool for hoping for something better. And you're not defined by what happened to you after he left." Kate looked at him for a long moment, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. "You really believe that?" she asked. "I do." As the night wore on, they continued to talk. Kate told him about her childhood in Boston, about the books she'd loved to read, and the dreams she'd once harbored of seeing the ocean. Thomas shared stories of his work with horses, of the satisfaction he found in gentling a wild stallion through patience, rather than force. Neither of them mentioned the future or what would happen when the sun rose. They simply sat together in that small room above the saloon, two lonely souls finding comfort in each other's company, while the rest of Millbrook slept on, unaware that something extraordinary was beginning to unfold in their midst. Dawn crept through the thin curtains of room 7, painting the wooden walls in shades of gold and amber. Thomas had kept his word. He'd sat with Kate through the entire night, never once making her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. As the first light touched her face, Kate realized she'd experienced something she'd almost forgotten existed: peace. "The sun's coming up," she said softly, watching the street below come to life with early morning activity. Thomas nodded, rising from his chair with the careful movements of a man who'd spent hours in the same position. "It is. I should let you get some rest." But as he reached for his hat, Kate surprised herself by speaking up. "Will you? Would you come back tonight?" Something warm flickered in Thomas's eyes. "If you'd like me to, I would." After Thomas left, Kate lay on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. For 6 months, she'd felt like she was drowning, going through the motions of survival while something essential inside her slowly died. But last night, talking with Thomas about books and horses and the way morning light looked different in every season, she'd felt like herself again. Downstairs, Martha Goldstein was already at work, preparing for another day of business. She looked up as Thomas descended the stairs, studying his face for clues about how the night had gone. "Everything all right up there?" she asked. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Goldstein. I'll be back tonight, if that's acceptable to Kate." Martha poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept brewing behind the bar. "You know, in 20 years of running this place, I've never had an arrangement quite like this one. I imagine not. The other girls are curious. They're wondering what makes Kate special enough to warrant such unusual attention." Thomas paused at the door. "Every person is special enough, Mrs. Goldstein. Kate just happens to be the one who needed someone to sit with her." After he left, Martha climbed the stairs to check on Kate. She found the young woman sitting by the window, still in her dress from the night before, watching the bustling street below with an expression Martha hadn't seen in months. "You look different," Martha observed, settling into the chair Thomas had occupied. "Do I?" "Lighter, somehow. Like you've set down something heavy." Kate turned from the window. "He's not like other men. No, he's not. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What do you mean?" Martha leaned forward. Kate, I've been watching you for 6 months. You do what you have to do to survive, but you're not really living. Last night, for the first time since you arrived, you looked alive. It was just one night of conversation, was it? Because from where I sit, it looks like it might be the beginning of something more. Kate shook her head. Women like me don't get new beginnings, Martha. We get by day, and we're grateful for small kindnesses when they come. Who? The question hung in the air between them. Kate had lived with certain assumptions about her life, about what she deserved and what was possible for someone with her past. But Thomas's presence had challenged those assumptions, making her wonder if maybe the story of her life wasn't finished being written. That evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, Thomas returned to the Silver Dollar. This time, his arrival didn't cause quite the same stir. A few men nodded to him, and Pete Morrison even tipped his hat in grudging respect. Word had spread that Thomas Brennan was conducting some kind of business arrangement with Kate Walsh, and while the details remained mysterious, the town had begun to accept it as just another peculiarity of their quiet horse trainer. Thomas climbed the stairs to room 7 and knocked gently. When Kate opened the door, he noticed she'd changed into a different dress, still simple, but cleaner and pressed. Her hair was arranged more carefully, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there the night before. Good evening, Miss Walsh. Good evening, Mr. Brennan. Please come in. They took their seats by the window, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it held the weight of possibility. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, Kate said finally. About the books I used to read. What about them? I realized I haven't read anything in months. I used to love stories, novels, poetry, even the newspaper. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing in stories with happy endings. Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. I brought you something. Kate took the book carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. Jane Eyre, she read aloud. It's about a woman who faces considerable hardship, but never loses her dignity or her sense of self-worth. I thought you might appreciate it. Kate opened the book and read the inscription on the first page. To Miss Catherine Walsh, who proves that true nobility comes from within. To be her eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away. Thank you. It's been so long since anyone gave me a book. Would you like me to read to you? Or would you prefer to read it yourself? Could you read the first chapter? I'd like to. Hear how it begins. Thomas opened the book and began to read in his steady, gentle voice. As he spoke, Kate found herself transported away from the small room above the saloon, away from the life she'd been living, into a world where orphaned girls could grow up to find love and respect despite their circumstances. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. Thomas read, and Kate closed her eyes, letting the familiar rhythm of storytelling wash over her. When he finished the first chapter, Kate opened her eyes to find him watching her with a gentle expression. It's beautiful, she said. I'd forgotten how powerful words could be. Words have the ability to change everything, Thomas agreed. They can wound or heal, destroy or build up. That's why I've always believed they should be used carefully. Is that why you're so quiet most of the time? Because you're being careful with your words? Thomas considered this. Partly. But also because I learned early that listening often teaches you more than speaking. And what have you learned by listening to me? That you're stronger than you know. That you've survived things that would break most people. And underneath everything that's happened to you, you're still the same person who loved books and dreamed of seeing the ocean. Kate felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of shame and self-doubt that had been tightening for months. Sometimes I feel like that person died somewhere between Boston and here. She didn't die. She's been waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to remind her that she's worth waiting for. They talked until dawn again, about everything and nothing. Kate told Thomas about her mother's garden, how she'd helped tend roses and herbs behind their small house in Boston. Thomas shared memories of his father, killed when Thomas was 12, and how he'd learned to gentle horses by watching an old Apache man who'd worked on the ranch where Thomas found his first job. He told me that fear makes animals unpredictable. Thomas said, but kindness makes them brave. Does that apply to people too? I think it might. As the night progressed, Kate found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in months. She laughed at Thomas's stories about stubborn mules and clever horses. She asked questions about his work, genuinely curious about this man who seemed to understand the language of broken things. Why horses? She asked. You could have chosen any trade, because horses are honest, Thomas replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. If they're afraid, they show it. If they trust you, they show that too. And when you've earned their trust, they'll give you everything they have. Even the wild ones, especially the wild ones. They've just learned to protect themselves. Once they understand you won't hurt them, they often become the most loyal companions you could ask for. Kate heard the deeper meaning in his words. You're not really talking about horses anymore, are you? Thomas met her eyes. I'm talking about anything that's been hurt enough to build walls around itself. The conversation that followed was the most honest either of them had shared with another person in years. Kate spoke about the shame she carried, the way it had changed how she saw herself and what she believed she deserved. Thomas talked about the loneliness of his life, the way he'd chosen solitude to avoid the risk of disappointment. I used to think that being alone was safer, Kate said. If you don't let anyone close, they can't leave you. But they can't save you either, Thomas replied. Do you think people can be saved after they've fallen so far? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I think people can choose to climb back up, but it's easier when someone's willing to hold the rope. When dawn broke on their second night together, Kate realized something had fundamentally shifted. She felt like she was seeing herself through Thomas's eyes, not as a fallen woman or a victim of circumstances, but as a person worthy of respect and kindness. Thomas, she said as he prepared to leave, why are you really doing this? He paused, his hand on the door handle. Because 6 months ago, I watched a woman get off the stage in this town, and I could see in her eyes that she was drowning. I've been drowning too, in my own way. Maybe we can help each other find the shore. After he left, Kate sat by the window watching the sun rise over Millbrook. For the first time since arriving in this dusty town, she began to imagine a future that extended beyond mere survival. She thought about the woman she'd been before David Morrison, about the dreams she'd carried and the person she'd hoped to become. Martha appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. You're going to have to make a decision soon, she said without preamble. What kind of decision? About what you want your life to look like. This arrangement with Thomas can't last forever. Eventually, you'll have to choose, stay here and continue as you have been, or find the courage to walk a different path. Kate accepted the coffee gratefully. What if I don't know how to walk a different path? What if I've forgotten how to be anything other than what I am now? Then you learn, one step at a time. And if I fall? Martha smiled, the first genuine smile Kate had seen from her. Then you get back up, that's what strong women do. That day, Kate did something she hadn't done in months. She took the book Thomas had given her and walked to the small park at the edge of town, where a few weathered benches sat under the shade of cottonwood trees. She spent the afternoon reading, losing herself in Jane Eyre's story of resilience and self-respect. As she read, she became aware of the life going on around her. Children playing, women hanging laundry, men heading home from work. She'd been living in Millbrook for 6 months, but she'd never really been part of it. She'd existed on the margins, in the shadows, accepting that she didn't belong in the daylight world of decent people. But sitting there with Thomas's book in her hands, Kate began to wonder if maybe she'd been wrong about that an elderly woman walking past noticed her reading and paused. "That's a wonderful book," she said kindly. "One of my favorites." Kate looked up, surprised. The woman was Margaret Henderson, the minister's wife, someone Kate had seen from a distance, but never imagined would speak to her. "You've read it?" Kate asked. "Oh yes, several times." Charlotte Brontë had such insight into the human heart. The way she writes about Jane's dignity in the face of hardship. It's quite inspiring. Margaret's eyes were warm and curious, with no trace of judgment or condemnation. She spoke to Kate as she would to any other woman enjoying a book in the park. "I'm Catherine Walsh," Kate said, unsure of what response she'd receive. "Margaret Henderson. It's lovely to meet you properly, Catherine. I've seen you around town, but we've never had the chance to be introduced." They talked for a few more minutes about books and the approaching autumn weather. When Margaret continued on her way, Kate sat stunned. For the first time since arriving in Millbrook, someone from the respectable part of town had treated her like a human being worthy of casual conversation. That evening, when Thomas arrived at room 7, he found Kate sitting by the window with Jane Eyre open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was staring out at the street with a thoughtful expression. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into his chair. Strange, hopeful, confusing. Kate closed the book and looked at him. "I met the minister's wife today. She was kind to me. Mrs. Henderson is a good woman. She treated me like I was just another person reading a book in the park, not like—" Kate gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "Maybe that's because that's exactly what you were, a person reading a book in the park. But I'm not just that, am I? I'm also a woman who works in a saloon. I can't pretend my past doesn't exist." Thomas leaned forward. "You're not pretending anything doesn't exist. You're acknowledging that you're more than just one part of your story. Is that what you think? That I'm more than this?" "Kate, I think you're everything you've ever been. The girl who loved books in Boston. The young woman who was brave enough to chase a dream, even when it led her astray. And the survivor who's been strong enough to endure months of hardship without losing her essential kindness. You're all of those things, not just the last one." Kate felt tears threatening again. "I don't know how to be all of those things at once. You don't have to figure it out all at once. You just have to decide whether you want to try." They spent the rest of the night talking about possibilities. For the first time, Kate allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to leave the silver dollar, to find respectable work, to rebuild the life she'd lost. Thomas listened without judgment, offering practical suggestions when she asked for them, but mainly just providing the gift of his attention and belief in her capacity for change. "I've been thinking about what you said," Kate told him as dawn approached, "about people helping each other find the shore. What about it? I think maybe I'm ready to stop drowning." Thomas smiled, the first truly joyful expression Kate had seen from him. "Then let's figure out how to get you there." As the sun rose over Millbrook for the third time since their unusual arrangement had begun, both Kate and Thomas felt the stirring of something they'd almost given up on: hope. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would hold, but for the first time in months, they believed it might hold something better than mere survival. The foundation of trust they'd built over 3 nights of honest conversation had created a platform from which Kate could begin to rebuild her life. And Thomas, who had spent years believing he was destined for solitude, discovered that helping someone else find their way back to themselves was also a path to his own redemption. In the growing light of dawn, Kate made a decision that would change everything. She was going to take the leap of faith that Thomas's kindness had made possible. She was going to try to reclaim the life she'd thought was lost forever. The fourth morning brought with it a crisp October wind that rattled the windows of the Silver Dollar and carried the scent of wood smoke from the chimneys of Millbrook's more respectable establishments. Kate Walsh stood before the cracked mirror in room 7, studying her reflection with eyes that saw possibilities. Where once there had been only resignation, she had made her decision in the pale light of dawn. But now, in the harsh reality of daylight, the magnitude of what she was contemplating made her hands tremble. To leave the silver dollar meant abandoning the only security she'd known for 6 months, however degrading that security might be. It meant facing a world that had already judged her and found her wanting, but it also meant the chance to become someone she could respect again. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Kate, it's Martha. May I come in?" Kate opened the door to find Martha Goldstein standing in the hallway, her usually sharp expression softened by something that might have been concerning. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Martha said, settling herself in the chair by the window. "About decisions and different paths. Have you? 23 years ago, I was a girl not much older than you, working in a place not much different from this one in Denver. I had dreams then too, of marriage, children, a respectable life. But I made the mistake of believing that what I was doing was who I was." Kate sat on the edge of her bed, surprised by this unexpected glimpse into Martha's past. "What happened? I had a chance to leave. A good man offered to marry me, to take me away from that life. But I was too afraid I wasn't good enough for him, afraid I'd bring shame to his family, afraid I'd never be able to escape what I'd been." Martha's voice grew quiet. "I let fear make my decision for me, and I've regretted it every day since." The weight of Martha's confession settled between them. Kate had never considered that the sharp-tongued madam might harbor her own regrets, her own lost dreams. "Why are you telling me this?" Kate asked. "Because I see something in your eyes that I haven't seen in years, hope. And because I'd rather live with the regret of encouraging someone to take a risk than the regret of watching them make the same mistake I did." Martha stood and walked to the door, then paused. "Whatever you decide, Kate, make sure it's what you decide. Don't let fear or shame or anyone else's opinion choose for you." After Martha left, Kate returned to her reflection in the mirror. She thought about the girl she'd been in Boston, full of dreams and possibilities. She thought about the woman she'd become in the months since David Morrison's betrayal. And she thought about the person she might yet become, if she found the courage to try. That evening, when Thomas arrived at the Silver Dollar, he found the atmosphere different. The usual crowd of cowboys and drifters seemed subdued, and Martha's expression was unreadable as she nodded toward the stairs. In room 7, Kate was waiting with a resolve in her posture that hadn't been there before. "You look different tonight," Thomas observed as he settled into his chair. "I feel different. I've been thinking about what you said, about helping each other find the shore. And," Kate took a deep breath, "I want to leave here. I want to find work somewhere else, somewhere I can start over, but I don't know how." Thomas had been hoping for this moment, but now that it had arrived, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with it. Kate was placing her trust in him, and he knew that whatever happened next would shape both their futures. "There are ways," he said carefully, "but it won't be easy. You'll need a place to stay while you look for work, and you'll need references, people willing to vouch for your character. I don't have either of those things. You have me." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Kate stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? Vouch for me?" "Kate, I've spent 4 nights getting to know you. I've seen your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I'd be honored to recommend you to anyone looking for an employee of good character, but people will ask questions. They'll want to know where I've been, what I've been doing." Thomas leaned forward. "Then we'll tell them the truth, that you're a woman who found herself in difficult circumstances and is now ready to rebuild her life. Anyone worth working for will understand that everyone deserves a second chance." Kate felt tears threatening, But these were different from the tears of shame and despair she'd shed so often in recent months. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of the overwhelming relief that came with knowing she wouldn't have to face the future alone. Where would I go? What kind of work could I do? Mrs. Henderson mentioned last week that she's been looking for help with the church's charitable work. Visiting the sick, helping with the children's Sunday school, organizing donations for families in need. It doesn't pay much, but it's respectable work. The minister's wife would hire me, knowing where I've been? I think she might, if someone she trusted recommended you. And there's something else. Old Mrs. Patterson, who runs the boarding house on Elm Street, has been looking for someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. She's getting on in years and could use the assistance. Kate's mind raced with possibilities. A boarding house position would provide room and board. Exactly. And Mrs. Patterson has a reputation for giving people a fair chance. She's taken in more than one person who needed a fresh start. They spent the next hour discussing practical details. Thomas offered to speak with both Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson to arrange meetings where Kate could present herself as a candidate for employment. He also insisted on providing her with enough money to purchase appropriate clothing for job interviews. "I can't take your money," Kate protested. "You're not taking it. You're borrowing it. You can pay me back when you're settled in your new situation." "And if I can't? If this doesn't work out?" Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Then we'll figure out another way. Kate, I'm not doing this because I expect anything in return. I'm doing it because it's right." As the night wore on, their conversation turned to dreams and possibilities. Kate talked about the kind of life she wanted to build, simple, honest, filled with meaningful work and genuine relationships. Thomas shared his own hopes, his desire to someday own a small ranch where he could breed and train horses, maybe even write a book about his methods. "You want to write a book?" Kate asked, surprised. "I've been thinking about it for years. All the things I've learned about working with difficult animals, about patience and trust and communication. I think it might help other people who work with horses. You should do it. You have insights that could help a lot of people. Maybe someday, when I have something worthy to say." "Thomas, you have something worthy to say right now. You've shown me that people can change, that kindness can heal wounds, that there's always hope for a better tomorrow. If that's not worthy of sharing, I don't know what is." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from downstairs, raised voices, the sound of furniture being overturned, and Martha's sharp tone cutting through the chaos. Thomas was on his feet immediately, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Stay here," he told Kate, but she was already moving toward the door. "I'm coming with you. If there's trouble, Martha might need help." They hurried down the stairs to find the main room of the Silver Dollar in chaos. A group of drunken cowboys from a nearby ranch had started a fight over a card game, and what began as a simple disagreement had escalated into a full brawl. Tables were overturned, bottles broken, and the other patrons were either joining the fight or trying to get out of the way. Martha stood behind the bar, a shotgun in her hands, trying to restore order. "That's enough," she shouted. "Take your fight outside, or I'll have the sheriff drag you all to jail." But the cowboys were too drunk and too angry to listen. One of them, a large man with a scar across his cheek, grabbed one of the other girls, a young woman named Lucy, and began dragging her toward the stairs. "Let go of me!" Lucy screamed, struggling against his grip. Thomas didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and placed a firm hand on the cowboy's shoulder. "The lady asked you to let her go." The scarred man turned, his eyes wild with drink and rage. "This ain't your business, horse trainer. Go back to your fancy lady upstairs. I'm making it my business. Let her go." What happened next occurred in a blur of violence. The cowboy released Lucy and swung at Thomas, who dodged the clumsy blow and responded with a swift uppercut that sent the larger man stumbling backward. The cowboy's friends moved to join the fight, but Thomas was ready for them. Kate watched in amazement as Thomas handled 3 men with a combination of speed, skill, and controlled aggression she'd never seen before. He moved like a dancer, always one step ahead of his opponents, never using more force than necessary, but always enough to end the threat. Within minutes, the fight was over. 2 of the cowboys lay unconscious on the floor, and the third, the scarred man, was backing toward the door, blood trickling from his nose. "This ain't over," he snarled at Thomas. "Yes, it is," Thomas replied calmly. "And if you ever lay hands on another woman in this establishment, you'll answer me personally." The cowboy glared at him for a moment longer, then turned and stalked out into the night, his unconscious friends being dragged after him by other patrons. Martha lowered her shotgun and looked at Thomas with new respect. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Army," Thomas said simply. "Long time ago." Kate stared at him, seeing yet another facet of this man who continued to surprise her. "You were a soldier?" "For a few years before I came to Millbrook. But that's not important now." He turned to Lucy, who was still shaking from her ordeal. "Are you all right, miss?" Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. He was going to ... double quotes. He's gone now," Thomas said gently. "And he won't be back." Martha began organizing the cleanup of the saloon, but her eyes kept returning to Thomas. "You didn't have to get involved," she said. "This kind of thing happens sometimes. The girls usually handle it." "No woman should have to handle that kind of treatment," Thomas replied. "Not ever." Kate felt her heart swell with admiration and something deeper, a feeling she'd been afraid to acknowledge but could no longer deny. Thomas wasn't just kind and patient and generous. He was also brave, willing to put himself at risk to protect others, even women whom society considered unworthy of protection. Later, back in room 7, Kate and Thomas sat in their familiar chairs, but the atmosphere between them had shifted. The violence downstairs had reminded them both of the harsh realities of Kate's current situation, of the dangers she faced every day in the Silver Dollar. "I want to leave," Kate said quietly. "Not someday, not when everything is perfectly arranged." "Soon, as soon as possible," Thomas nodded. "I'll speak to Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson tomorrow. We'll make this happen, Kate. I promise." "Why?" The question came out more urgently than she'd intended. "Why are you doing all this for me? And don't tell me it's just because everyone deserves kindness. There's something more, isn't there?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pre-dawn darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Kate felt her breath catch, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Thomas could hear it. "Thomas ... I know it's complicated. I know you have every reason not to trust men's promises. But I need you to know that everything I've done, everything I'm offering to do, it's not because I expect anything in return. It's because I care about you. Because I want to see you happy and safe and free to become whoever you want to be." Kate felt tears streaming down her face. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. But I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of believing in something beautiful and having it taken away again. Of not being worthy of the love you're offering. Of dragging you down with my past." Thomas reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "Kate, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of respect and kindness and every good thing this world has to offer. Your past doesn't define you, your choices do. And every choice you've made since I've known you has shown me the kind of person you really are." They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the sun rise over Millbrook. In the growing light, Kate saw not just the dusty street and weathered buildings, but the possibility of a new life built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. "If I leave the silver dollar," she said finally, "if I take this chance you're offering, there's no going back. I'll be completely dependent on your help, at least at first. I understand. And I want you to know that my feelings for you don't change the offer. Whether you can return my feelings or not, I want to help you build the life you deserve." Kate squeezed his hand. "I want to try. I want to try to be the woman you see when you look at me. You already are that woman, Kate. You just need to believe it yourself." As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Kate Walsh made the decision that would change everything. She would leave the silver dollar, trust in Thomas Brennan's love and support, and begin the difficult but hopeful work of rebuilding her life from the ground up. The foundation they'd built over 4 nights of honest conversation and growing. Trust was about to be tested in the harsh light of day. But for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, Kate believed she was strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead, because she wouldn't be facing them alone. The morning after, their confessions brought a new energy to Millbrook, as if the very air had shifted to accommodate the possibility of change. Thomas walked through town with a purpose he hadn't felt in years, his boots clicking against the wooden sidewalks as he made his way toward the white-steepled church at the end of Main Street. Margaret Henderson was tending to her flower garden. When he approached, her weathered hands gentle with the late-blooming chrysanthemums that bordered the church grounds. She looked up as his shadow fell across the garden path, her kind eyes curious but welcoming. "Mr. Brennan, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you this morning?" Thomas removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Mrs. Henderson, I was hoping to speak with you about a matter of some importance. It concerns employment." Margaret straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "Employment? Are you looking for work yourself?" "No, ma'am. I'm inquiring on behalf of someone else. A young woman who's seeking a fresh start and honest work." Something in his tone made Margaret study his face more carefully. "I see. And this young woman, is she someone I know?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Her name is Catherine Walsh. You met her briefly in the park yesterday when she was reading." Margaret's expression didn't change, but Thomas caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood exactly who he was talking about. "Miss Walsh, yes, we had a lovely conversation about literature. Mrs. Henderson, I know what you're thinking. I know where Kate has been working these past months. But I also know who she really is, a woman of intelligence and character who found herself in desperate circumstances and made the only choice she felt was available to her." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from Thomas to the church behind him, as if seeking guidance from the building itself. "Mr. Brennan, why are you involving yourself in this young woman's situation?" "Because she deserves a chance to rebuild her life. And because I believe that helping someone find their way back to respectability is exactly the kind of work the church should be supporting." "And what makes you so certain of her character?" Thomas met her eyes directly. "I've spent considerable time talking with her, Mrs. Henderson. I've seen her kindness, her intelligence, her genuine desire to change her circumstances. She's not asking for charity. She's asking for the opportunity to earn an honest living." Margaret walked to a small wooden bench near the garden and gestured for Thomas to join her. "You speak with great conviction about someone most of this town has already written off. Then maybe it's time this town learned something about redemption." The words hung between them, and Margaret found herself thinking of the sermons her husband preached about forgiveness and second chances. What kind of work is she seeking? "She's educated, well-spoken, and good with children. I thought perhaps your charitable work might benefit from an assistant. Someone to help with visiting the sick, organizing donations, teaching Sunday school. You realize that hiring someone with her background would cause considerable talk in the community?" Thomas nodded. "I understand the risk you'd be taking. But I also believe that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing to do." Margaret was quiet for several minutes, her hands folded. In her lap, her eyes focused on the flowers she'd been tending. Finally she spoke. "Bring her to see me tomorrow afternoon. Not here at the church, at my home. We'll have tea and discuss the possibilities." Relief flooded Thomas's features. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You won't regret this." "I hope not, Mr. Brennan. But I'll tell you now, if she proves unworthy of the faith you're placing in her, it will reflect poorly on both of you." From the church, Thomas walked across town to Elm Street, where a large Victorian house served as Mrs. Patterson's boarding establishment. Eleanor Patterson was a widow in her 70s, with silver hair pinned severely back and eyes that missed nothing. She was hanging laundry when Thomas approached, her movements efficient despite her age. "Mr. Brennan," she said without looking up from her work, "I heard about the excitement at the Silver Dollar last night. Heard you handled yourself well. News traveled fast in a small town. Just helping to keep the peace, Mrs. Patterson." She finished hanging the sheet and turned to face him. "What brings you to my establishment? You've got your own place outside town. I'm here about employment, ma'am. For someone who needs work and a place to stay." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. What kind of someone? Thomas had learned from his conversation with Margaret Henderson. Direct honesty seemed to work better than dancing around the subject. A young woman who's been working at the Silver Dollar but wants to leave that life behind. She needs honest work and a respectable place to live. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "You're talking about the Welsh girl?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you think I should take in a soiled dove and give her work in my establishment?" The crude term made Thomas's jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I think you should consider giving a chance to a woman who's trying to rebuild her life." "Why? What's she to you?" Thomas hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Someone I care about deeply." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "I see. And you think your feelings for this girl are clouding your judgment about her character?" "No, ma'am. I think my feelings for her have helped me see her character more clearly." Eleanor walked to her porch and sat heavily in a rocking chair, gesturing for Thomas to take the chair beside her. "Tell me about her." Not about her circumstances, but about her. For the next half hour, Thomas spoke about Kate, her intelligence, her love of books, her genuine kindness even in the face of hardship. He told Eleanor about Kate's conversations with Margaret Henderson, about her dreams of honest work and a respectable life. "She sounds too good to be true," Eleanor said finally. "She's not perfect, Mrs. Patterson. She's made mistakes, trusted the wrong person, found herself in a situation no woman should have to face. But she's survived it with her dignity intact, and now she's trying to find her way back." Eleanor rocked in her chair, considering. "I do need help. The work's getting too much for these old bones. But hiring someone with her reputation, it could hurt my business. Or it could be exactly the kind of Christian charity this town needs to see more of." "Don't preach to me, young man. I've been practicing Christian charity since before you were born." But there was no heat in Eleanor's words. "Bring her to see me. Tomorrow evening, after supper. We'll talk." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." "Don't thank me yet. If she's not what you say she is, if she brings trouble to my house, she'd be out on the street before sunrise. And you'll answer me for the recommendation." Thomas spent the rest of the day making other preparations. He visited the general store and arranged for appropriate clothing to be delivered to Kate, simple dresses suitable for work, a warm coat for the approaching winter, and sturdy shoes. He also stopped by the bank and arranged for a small loan against his savings, money Kate could use to pay for her first month's board while she established herself in her new position. When evening came, he made his way to the Silver Dollar with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Kate was waiting in room 7, but she wasn't alone. Lucy, the girl Thomas had helped the night before, was sitting with her, and both women looked up anxiously when he entered. Lucy wanted to thank you properly, Kate explained. The young woman stood and curtsied awkwardly. Mr. Brennan, I don't have words for what you did. That man, he would have. You don't need to thank me, Thomas said gently. Any decent man would have done the same. But you're the only one who did. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. Kate told me about your arrangement, about how you're helping her leave here. I just wanted you to know that there are others of us who dream of something different too. Thomas looked between the two young women, seeing the hope and desperation in both their faces. What's your story, Lucy? Similar to Kate's, though I came from further away. My family died of cholera in Kansas, and I had nowhere to go. I've been here 8 months now, sending money back to my younger brother who's living with relatives. Lucy wiped her eyes. I can't leave like Kate can. I have responsibilities. Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking. What kind of work could you do if you had the opportunity? I can sew. I'm good with my hands, and I learn quickly. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she might need more than one helper if her business continues to grow. And the dress shop on Main Street has been looking for a seamstress. Lucy's eyes widened. You think there might be opportunities for me too? Let's get Kate settled first, Thomas said carefully. But yes, I think there might be possibilities. After Lucy left, Kate and Thomas sat in their familiar chairs for what they both knew would be the last time. Tomorrow, Kate would begin the process of leaving the silver dollar behind forever. I spoke with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson today, Thomas said. Both women are willing to meet with you. Kate's hands trembled slightly. What did you tell them? The truth. That you're a woman of character who deserves a second chance. And they believed you? They're willing to judge you for themselves. Mrs. Henderson wants to see you tomorrow afternoon at her home. Mrs. Patterson wants to meet tomorrow evening. Kate nodded, trying to appear calmer than she felt. What if they don't like me? What if they can see what I've been and decide I'm not suitable? Thomas reached across and took her hands in his. Kate, you've been practicing being suitable your whole life. You just forgot for a while. Trust yourself. They spent their final night in room 7 talking about practical matters. What Kate should wear to the interviews, how she should present herself, what questions she might be asked. But underneath the practical concerns lay deeper currents of emotion. This was a turning point for both of them, the moment when their relationship would either flourish in the light of day or wither under the scrutiny of a judgmental world. Thomas, Kate said as dawn approached, what happens if this works? If I get one of these positions and move into respectable society, what do you mean? I mean, what happens between us? You'll be Thomas Brennan, the respected horse trainer. And I'll be ... well, I'll still be a woman with a past. People will talk. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Let them talk. Kate, I told you I was falling in love with you, and I meant it. That doesn't change based on where you're working or what people say about us. But it could hurt your reputation, your business. My reputation is built on how I treat horses and how I keep my word. As long as I continue to do both those things well, I'll have work. Thomas squeezed her hands. Kate, I've been alone for most of my life. I'm not willing to go back to being alone to protect myself from gossip. Kate felt tears threatening again, happy tears this time. I love you too, Thomas. I think I have since that first night when you just sat with me without expecting anything in return. Then we'll face whatever comes together. As the sun rose on what would be Kate's last morning at the Silver Dollar, both of them felt the weight of the day ahead. The interviews with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson would determine not just Kate's immediate future, but the course of both their lives. Martha appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee and a package wrapped in brown paper. Your new clothes arrived, she said, setting both on the small table. Courtesy of Mr. Brennan, I assume. Kate nodded, touched by Thomas's thoughtfulness. Well then, Martha said, her voice gruffer than usual. I suppose this is goodbye. Martha. Don't. Martha held up a hand. Don't apologize and don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Just ... Make this worth it, Kate. Make the risk Thomas is taking worth it. Make the chances these women are giving you worth it. Kate stood and embraced the older woman, feeling Martha's arms tighten around her briefly before she pulled away. You're stronger than you know, Martha whispered. Remember that when things get difficult. After Martha left, Kate unwrapped the package Thomas had sent. Inside were 3 simple but well-made dresses in shades of blue and brown, a warm wool coat, sturdy leather shoes, and even appropriate undergarments. Everything a respectable woman would need to present herself properly in polite society. As Kate changed into one of the new dresses, she caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror and was surprised by what she saw. The woman looking back at her no longer appeared defeated or ashamed. She looked like someone ready to fight for her future. Thomas waited downstairs, and when Kate descended the steps of the Silver Dollar for the last time, she saw pride and love shining in his eyes. Ready? He asked, offering her his arm. Kate took a deep breath, thinking of all the nights she'd climbed these stairs feeling like she was disappearing a little more each time. Now walking down them with Thomas beside her, she felt like she was finally coming back to life. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. Together, they walked out of the Silver Dollar and into the bright morning sunshine, leaving behind the shadows of Kate's past and stepping toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The real test of their love. And Thomas's faith in Kate's character was about to begin. The Henderson home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Their leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold in the October afternoon. Kate stood at the white picket gate, her new blue dress pressed and proper, her hands steady despite the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm her. Thomas had walked her this far, but would go no further. This meeting was something she had to face alone. Remember, he said quietly, you're not asking for charity. You're offering your skills and character in exchange for honest work. Kate nodded, straightening her shoulders. I can do this. I know you can. She watched him walk away before opening the gate and making her way up the stone path to the front door. The house was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes beneath the windows and a cheerful yellow door that spoke of warmth and welcome. Margaret Henderson answered Kate's knock promptly, as if she'd been watching from the window. She was dressed simply in a brown wool dress, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Walsh, please come in. The interior of the Henderson home was exactly what Kate had expected, clean, comfortable, filled with books and family photographs. Margaret led her to a small parlor where tea was already laid out on a round table covered with white lace. Please sit, Margaret said, gesturing to a chair upholstered in faded blue fabric. I thought we might have our conversation over tea. Kate sat carefully, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Mrs. Henderson. Margaret poured tea from a china pot painted with tiny roses. Mr. Brennan spoke very highly of you. He seems quite convinced of your character. He's been very kind to me, has he? Margaret's eyes were sharp but not unkind. And what do you make of his kindness? The question caught Kate off guard. She'd expected inquiries about her qualifications, her past, her intentions. She hadn't expected to be asked about Thomas. I think, Kate said carefully, that Thomas Brennan is the sort of man who sees the best in people, even when they've forgotten it exists themselves. A romantic assessment. Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks. Perhaps, but also an honest one. Margaret sipped her tea, studying Kate over the rim of her cup. Tell me about yourself, Miss Walsh. Not your circumstances, but yourself. What do you enjoy? What are your interests? For the next hour they talked about books, about Kate's education, about her experiences helping her mother with charitable work in Boston. Margaret asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to the answers. occasionally nodding or making small sounds of interest. "You mentioned helping with Sunday school," Margaret said finally. "What experience do you have with children?" "I helped teach reading to the younger children in our Boston parish. I found that they learned better when the lessons were presented as stories rather than simple recitation. An interesting approach. And visiting the sick, that can be difficult. Work, both physically and emotionally. What draws you to it?" Kate considered her answer carefully. "I think there's great comfort in knowing that someone cares enough to sit with you during difficult times. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply not being alone." Something in Margaret's expression shifted, and Kate saw a flicker of understanding pass across her features. "Miss Walsh," Margaret said, setting down her teacup, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like a direct answer. Why should I trust you with work that will put you in contact with the most vulnerable members of our community?" Kate had prepared for this question, but now that it had come, the practiced answers seemed inadequate. Instead, she found herself speaking from her heart. "Because I know what it feels like to be vulnerable. I know what it's like to be judged, to be written off, to feel like you don't matter to anyone. If I can use that understanding to bring comfort to others, then perhaps some good can come from my experiences." Margaret was quiet for a long time, her eyes focused on some point beyond Kate's shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been. "6 months ago, my youngest daughter died of consumption. She was 23 years old, married, with a baby son who now lives with us. In her final weeks, she was visited by many people, church members, family friends, neighbors. They all meant well, but most of them were uncomfortable around death, around suffering. They didn't know how to simply sit with someone who was dying." Kate felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. But my point is this. There was one visitor who was different. A woman who had experienced great loss herself. She didn't try to offer platitudes or false comfort. She just sat with Sarah, read to her, helped her feel less alone. It was the greatest gift anyone gave us during that terrible time." Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out at the maple trees. "I believe that those who have suffered can offer a kind of comfort that others cannot. If you're willing to use your experiences to help others, then perhaps you're exactly the person we need." Kate felt hope bloom in her chest. "Are you offering me the position?" "I'm offering you a trial period. 2 weeks, helping with our charitable visits and assisting with Sunday school preparation. If it works out well for both of us, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." "What about the pay?" $2 a week, plus meals when you're working. At the church, it's not much, but it's honest money." Kate stood, extending her hand. "I accept, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for taking this chance on me." Margaret shook her hand firmly. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Walsh. Prove to me that my faith in you is justified." Kate left the Henderson home with her heart lighter than it had been in months. The position was modest, the pay small, but it was respectable work that would allow her to rebuild her reputation in the community. More importantly, it was work that felt meaningful, work that would allow her to help others in the way Thomas had helped her. She found Thomas waiting for her at the small park where they'd agreed to meet, sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree. His face broke into a smile when he saw her expression. "Good news?" he asked. "Very good news." Kate sat beside him and told him about the conversation with Margaret Henderson, about the trial period and the opportunity to prove herself. "I'm proud of you," Thomas said, taking her hand. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, grateful," Kate laughed. "I haven't felt this many emotions at once in months." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching children play in the fallen leaves while their mothers chatted nearby. Kate noticed that several of the women glanced in their direction, their expressions curious but not hostile. Word of her interview with Mrs. Henderson had probably already begun to spread through the small community. "Thomas," she said quietly, "what if I fail? What if I'm not as good at this work as Mrs. Henderson hopes? Then you'll learn and improve. Kate, you're not expected to be perfect from the first day. You're expected to try your best and care about the work. And what about us? What happens to our relationship now that I'm moving into respectable society?" Thomas turned to face her fully. "What happens is that we court properly. I'll call on you at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house with her permission. We'll attend church functions together. We'll let people see that what's between us is genuine and honorable. People will still talk. Let them. Kate, I've lived my entire adult life worried about what other people thought, keeping to myself to avoid judgment. I'm not willing to do that anymore, not when it means losing you." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a well-dressed woman in her 40s, accompanied by 2 young children. Kate recognized her as Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, the wife of the town's only lawyer and one of the most influential women in Millbrook's social circles. "Mr. Brennan," Mrs. Mitchell said with a polite nod. "How lovely to see you." Thomas stood, removing his hat. "Mrs. Mitchell, allow me to introduce Miss Catherine Walsh." Kate rose as well, her heart pounding. This was her first test of acceptance in polite society, and Mrs. Mitchell's reaction would likely influence how other respectable women in town treated her. Mrs. Mitchell's eyes assessed Kate carefully, taking in her modest dress and proper demeanor. "Miss Walsh, I believe Margaret Henderson mentioned that you might be helping with some of our charitable work." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm very much looking forward to it." "How wonderful. We can always use dedicated volunteers." Mrs. Mitchell's tone was carefully neutral, but not unfriendly. "I understand you have experience with children." "Some experience, yes. I find them delightful to work with." One of Mrs. Mitchell's children, a boy of perhaps 6, had been staring at Kate with the frank curiosity of youth. "Are you the lady who used to work at the saloon?" he asked innocently. Mrs. Mitchell's face flushed with embarrassment. "Timothy, that's not an appropriate question." But Kate surprised everyone by kneeling down to the boy's level. "I did work there, yes. But now I'm going to work helping people who are sick or sad, trying to make them feel better. Do you think that's important?" "Work?" The boy nodded solemnly. "My grandmother was sick last year, and people came to visit her. It made her happy. Then you understand exactly why I want to do this work." Kate stood to find Mrs. Mitchell looking at her with something approaching approval. That was well handled, Miss Walsh. Children deserve honest answers to honest questions, don't you think? "Indeed." Mrs. Mitchell gathered her children. "Well, we should be going. I'm sure we'll see more of each other as you begin your work with the church." After they left, Thomas looked at Kate with amazement. "That was perfectly done. You turned what could have been an awkward situation into an opportunity to show your character. I meant what I said about honest answers. I'm tired of hiding from my past. If I'm going to build a new life, it has to be built on truth, not pretense." The afternoon shadows were growing longer, and Kate knew it was time to prepare for her evening meeting with Mrs. Patterson. Thomas walked her back toward the boarding house, their hands clasped, both of them aware that they were being observed by various townspeople going about their daily business. "Are you nervous about meeting Mrs. Patterson?" Thomas asked. "Less nervous than I was about Mrs. Henderson. I think I'm getting better at being myself." Eleanor Patterson's boarding house was a 3-story Victorian structure with a wide front porch and bay windows that looked out over Elm Street. The building was well maintained but showed signs of age, with paint that needed refreshing and steps that creaked underfoot. Kate knocked on the front door promptly at 6 o'clock and was greeted by Mrs. Patterson herself, a silver-haired woman with sharp blue eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Kate of her own grandmother. "Miss Walsh, I presume. Come in, come in." No point standing in the ceremony. The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, if somewhat worn. The parlor was furnished with overstuffed chairs and a large wooden table where several residents sat reading newspapers or playing cards. The smell of roast beef and potatoes drifted from the kitchen, making Kate's stomach rumble. "Let's go to my private sitting room," Mrs. Patterson said, leading Kate down a hallway lined with photographs of previous residents. "We can talk without interruption there." Mrs. Patterson's sitting room was small but cozy, with a fireplace, 2 comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with books. Unlike Mrs. Henderson's careful formality, Eleanor Patterson settled into her chair with the ease of someone comfortable in her own space. "Now then," she said without preamble, "Thomas Brennan tells me you're looking for honest work and a respectable place to live. He also tells me you've been working at the Silver Dollar, which puts us both in an interesting position." Kate appreciated the direct approach. "Yes, ma'am. I understand that hiring me would involve some risk to your reputation." "Some risk?" "Girl, it could ruin my business if people decide they don't want their daughters or wives staying in the same establishment as a former saloon girl." "Then why are you considering it?" Eleanor studied Kate's face carefully. "Because Thomas Brennan is one of the finest men I've ever known. And if he's willing to stake his reputation on you, then you're probably worth the risk. Also because I'm getting too old to manage this place alone, and I need help from someone with sense and backbone." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters. Mrs. Patterson explained that the position would involve cooking, cleaning, managing the laundry, and handling the business side of running the boarding house. In exchange, Kate would receive room and board plus $3 a week. "The work is hard," Eleanor warned. "I run a respectable establishment, which means clean rooms, good food, and proper behavior from all residents. You'll be working from dawn to dusk most days." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Patterson." "Good, because I don't tolerate laziness or prima donna behavior. You'll be expected to earn your keep from day one." As their conversation continued, Kate found herself genuinely liking the older woman's straightforward manner. Eleanor Patterson was tough but fair, and she clearly took pride in providing a safe, comfortable home for people who needed it. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Eleanor said as their meeting drew to a close. "Your relationship with Thomas Brennan." Kate felt her cheeks warm. "Ma'am? I don't run that kind of establishment. Miss Walsh, if you're going to be living under my roof, any courtship will be conducted according to proper standards. Mr. Brennan may call on you in the parlor. With appropriate supervision, there will be no improper behavior in my house." "Of course not, Mrs. Patterson. Thomas and I understand the need for propriety." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Good. Then we understand each other." She stood and extended her hand. "The position is yours, Miss Walsh, starting tomorrow morning. Don't make me regret this decision." Kate shook her hand firmly. "I won't, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you for taking this chance on me." As Kate left the boarding house, she felt the weight of the day settling over her. In the space of a few hours, she had secured 2 positions that would allow her to rebuild her life with dignity and purpose. More importantly, she had faced the scrutiny of respectable society and emerged with her sense of self intact. Thomas was waiting for her at the corner, his face anxious until he saw her smile. "Both positions?" he asked. "Both positions," she confirmed. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around once before setting her back on her feet, both of them laughing with relief and joy. "Kate Walsh," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. And you, Thomas Brennan, are the man who made it all possible." As they walked back toward the center of town, planning the details of Kate's new life, both of them felt the deep satisfaction that comes from having fought for something worthwhile and won. The hardest part, the leap of faith, was behind them. Now came the equally challenging, but infinitely more hopeful work of building a future together. The sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time since arriving in this dusty town, Kate Walsh felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, walking hand in hand with the man she loved, she felt nothing but gratitude for the unexpected gift of a second chance. 3 weeks had passed since Kate Walsh began her new life, and the transformation was remarkable to anyone who cared to observe. Each morning, she woke in her small but clean room on the second floor of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, dressed in one of her simple work dresses, and began her day with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in over a year. The work was indeed demanding, as Eleanor Patterson had warned. Kate's days began before dawn, preparing breakfast for the 8 residents who called the boarding house home. There was old Mr. Jameson, a retired railroad worker with a persistent cough and a fondness for strong coffee. Miss Rebecca Thornton, an unmarried schoolteacher who kept to herself but always thanked Kate kindly for her meals. And James Morrison, a young bank clerk saving money to bring his fiancée west from Ohio. Each resident had their own story, their own reasons for needing temporary lodging, and Kate found herself genuinely caring about their small triumphs and daily struggles. When Mr. Jameson's cough worsened, she prepared special teas with honey and herbs. When Miss Thornton mentioned struggling with a particularly difficult student, Kate shared techniques she'd learned from her own brief teaching experience in Boston. "You have a gift for making people feel cared for," Eleanor Patterson observed. One morning as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing lunch for the residents. "That's not something that can be taught." Kate looked up from the bread she was slicing. "I think maybe when you've felt forgotten, you become more aware of when others need attention." Eleanor nodded approvingly. The older woman had been watching Kate carefully during these first weeks, looking for any sign that Thomas Brennan's faith had been misplaced. Instead, she'd found herself increasingly impressed by Kate's work ethic, her natural kindness, and her ability to manage the complex personalities that populated a boarding house. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," Eleanor said, wiping her hands on her apron. "About expanding your responsibilities here." Kate paused in her work. "What kind of expansion?" "Business has been growing since you started. Word is getting around that we're serving better meals and providing more attentive service. I'm thinking of adding 2 more rooms upstairs, maybe taking on a few more long-term residents." "That sounds wonderful, but it would mean more work." "It would mean more work and better pay. I'd be willing to increase your wages to $5 a week. Plus, I'd like to give you more authority in running the day-to-day operations." Kate felt a surge of pride and anxiety in equal measure. "You'd trust me with that kind of responsibility?" "I've been running this place for 15 years, Kate. I know good help when I see it." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "But there's something you need to understand. Taking on more responsibility here means you'll be more visible in the community. People will see you as one of the faces of this establishment. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Kate considered the question carefully. In her work with Mrs. Henderson, she'd already begun to experience what it meant to move in respectable society while carrying the weight of her past. Some people, like Margaret Henderson herself, had proven surprisingly accepting. Others maintained a polite but distant reserve that made it clear she was being tolerated rather than welcomed. "I think I'm ready," Kate said finally. "I've learned that hiding from my past only gives it more power over me. If I'm going to build a life here, it has to be built honestly." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the kitchen door. Kate opened it to find Thomas standing on the back step, his hat in his hands and a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers in his arms. "Mr. Brennan," Eleanor said with mock sternness, "you know, proper calling hours are in the evening, in the front parlor." Thomas grinned sheepishly. "Yes, ma'am. But I was hoping to speak with Kate briefly about a matter concerning the church work." Eleanor rolled her eyes but gestured him inside. "5 minutes. Kate has work to finish." Thomas handed Kate the flowers. their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "How are you feeling about Sunday?" Kate felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. This coming Sunday would mark her first appearance in Millbrook's Methodist Church since beginning her work with Mrs. Henderson. She'd been helping with charitable visits and Sunday school preparation for 3 weeks, but actually attending service would be her most public appearance yet in respectable society. Nervous, she admitted. What if people stare? What if they whisper? Then they'll be showing poor Christian behavior in the house of God, Thomas said firmly. Kate, you have every right to worship there. You're doing good work for the church, and you're living an honest life. Eleanor cleared her throat meaningfully, and Thomas took the hint. I should go. But Kate, remember, you're not the same person who arrived in Millbrook 7 months ago. You've earned your place in that church. After he left, Kate buried her face in the wildflowers, breathing in their sweet scent. Eleanor watched her with a knowing expression. That man is deeply in love with you, she observed. And I am with him. Good. Love that grows slowly, built on respect and genuine affection, tends to last. Not like those passionate affairs that burn bright and flame out. Kate thought about David Morrison, about the whirlwind romance that had led her to abandon everything she'd known. Eleanor was right. What she felt for Thomas was deeper, steadier, built on a foundation of truly knowing each other. Saturday evening brought an unexpected visitor to the boarding house. Kate was in the parlor, mending linens by lamplight while several residents read or played quiet games of cards, when Eleanor appeared in the doorway with a familiar figure behind her. Kate, Eleanor said, you have a caller. Kate looked up to see Lucy standing uncertainly in the doorway, wearing a simple brown dress Kate didn't recognize and clutching a small carpet bag. Lucy, Kate set aside her mending and rose quickly. What are you doing here? I left, Lucy said simply. I left the silver dollar, tonight. The parlor had gone quiet, all the residents suddenly very interested in their newspapers and card games. Kate could feel their curiosity like a physical presence. Eleanor, Kate said quietly, might Lucy and I speak privately? Eleanor nodded. Toward a small sitting room off the main parlor. Use my personal parlor. I'll bring tea. In the privacy of Eleanor's sitting room, Lucy broke down and told her story. A traveling businessman had arrived at the Silver Dollar that afternoon, demanding Lucy's services and becoming violent when she tried to refuse. Martha had intervened, but the incident had shaken Lucy badly. I kept thinking about what you did, Lucy said through her tears, how you found the courage to leave. I realized I couldn't stay there anymore, no matter what it cost me. Where? Will you go? What will you do? I don't know. I have a little money saved, enough for a few nights at a cheap hotel. But after that, Lucy shrugged helplessly. Kate's mind raced through possibilities. The dress shop Thomas had mentioned was still looking for a seamstress, but they'd want references, proof of skill. Lucy would need time to establish herself, to prove her worth. Stay here tonight, Kate said impulsively, in my room. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. Kate, I can't impose on your new life. You've worked so hard to build respectability. Lucy, respectability that requires me to turn my back on someone in need isn't worth having. Eleanor appeared with a tea tray and an expression that suggested she'd overheard at least part of the conversation. Miss Lucy, she said, settling into a chair, I understand you found yourself in need of lodging. Lucy nodded, clearly intimidated by the older woman's direct manner. Kate speaks very highly of your character and your skills with a needle. As it happens, I'm in need of someone to help with the household mending and perhaps to take in some outside sewing work to supplement our income. Kate stared at Eleanor in amazement. You'd offer Lucy work? I'd offer her the same chance I offered you, an opportunity to prove herself through honest labor. The pay would be modest, room and board, plus $2 a week to start, but it would be respectable employment. Lucy burst into fresh tears, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what to say. Say you'll work hard and cause no trouble in my establishment. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." "Then consider yourself employed, pending a trial period of 2 weeks. Later that evening, as Kate and Lucy prepared for bed in Kate's small room, Lucy expressed her amazement at the turn of events. "I can't believe this is happening. This morning I was trapped at the Silver Dollar, and tonight I have honest work and a respectable place to live. It's what you deserve, Lucy. What we both deserve. But how did you know Mrs. Patterson would help? Weren't you taking a terrible risk, asking her to take in another girl from the saloon?" Kate considered the question as she brushed her hair. "By candlelight. I suppose I've learned that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking a risk at all. If I've learned anything these past weeks, it's that there are more good people in the world than I thought. They just need to be given the chance to show their goodness." Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, with the first real hint of winter in the air. Kate dressed with particular care in her best blue dress, a simple but well-made garment that Thomas had helped her select. Lucy, nervous about her first public appearance since leaving the Silver Dollar, wore the brown dress she'd arrived in. But Kate lent her a warm shawl and a pair of gloves. The Methodist Church sat at the end of Main Street, its white steeple reaching toward the crisp blue sky. As Kate and Lucy approached the building, Kate could see other congregants arriving, families dressed in their Sunday best, children running ahead of their parents, older couples walking arm in arm. Thomas was waiting for them at the church steps, handsome in a dark suit Kate had never seen before. His face lit up when he saw her, and he offered his arm with a smile that made her heart flutter. "Miss Walsh, Miss Lucy, you both look lovely this morning." As they climbed the church steps together, Kate was aware of the attention they were drawing. Some people nodded politely, others stared openly, and she could hear the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. "Is that the girl from the Silver Dollar? I heard Margaret Henderson hired her. She's walking with Thomas Brennan. Bold as brass, showing up here like she belongs." Kate lifted her chin and kept walking, Thomas's steady presence beside her giving her strength. She had every right to be here, and she wouldn't let anyone's disapproval make her feel otherwise. Inside the church, Margaret Henderson waved them toward a pew near the front, where she sat with her husband and grandson. The gesture of public acceptance was not lost on anyone in the congregation, and Kate felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who had been willing to see past her. History. Reverend Henderson's sermon that morning focused on redemption and second chances, and Kate couldn't help but wonder if the topic had been chosen specifically for her benefit. As he spoke about the possibility of transformation through faith and good works, she felt the words settling into her heart like seeds taking root. "We are all," the Reverend said in his gentle but carrying voice, "works in progress in the eyes of the Almighty. What matters is not where we have been, but the direction we are traveling." After the service, Kate braced herself for the social gauntlet of the church steps, where congregants typically gathered to exchange pleasantries and community news. To her surprise, several people approached her directly. Mrs. Mitchell, whom she'd met in the park, introduced Kate to her husband and praised her work with the children's Sunday school. Old Mr. Jameson from the boarding house spoke proudly of her cooking to anyone who would listen. Even some of the women who had initially been cool toward her made polite inquiries about her charitable work. Not everyone was welcoming, of course. Kate noticed clusters of women who watched her with disapproving expressions, and she overheard enough whispered comments to know that her presence in the church was still controversial for some. But as she stood on the church steps with Thomas beside her, Lucy chatting nervously with Mrs. Henderson about sewing techniques, and the autumn sun warming her face, Kate felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. She felt like she belonged somewhere. The afternoon brought an unexpected test of Kate's new social position. She and Lucy were walking back to the boarding house when they encountered a group of young women near the general store. Kate recognized them as daughters of some of Millbrook's more prominent families, girls who had never known want or desperation, who had grown up secure in their social position. "Well, well," said one of them, a blonde girl of perhaps 19, whose father owned the largest ranch in the area. "If it isn't the church's new charity case." Kate felt Lucy tense beside her, but she kept her own voice calm and steady. "Good afternoon, Miss Crawford. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day." "Oh, I'm enjoying it very much. Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see you walking around town so boldly. Don't you think you should show a bit more humility?" The other girls giggled, clearly enjoying the confrontation. Kate felt the familiar burn of shame trying to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had nothing to be ashamed of anymore. "I think," Kate said quietly, "that true humility comes from recognizing our own capacity for both failure and growth. I hope you never have to learn that lesson the hard way." Miss Crawford's smile faltered, clearly not having expected such a measured response. Before she could reply, a new voice cut through the tension. "Miss Crawford, I'm surprised to hear such uncharitable talk from someone who was just sitting in church listening to a sermon about redemption." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Mitchell approaching, her expression stern. The young woman flushed red, suddenly realizing that her behavior was being witnessed by one of the community's most respected matrons. "I was just ... We were just ... You were being unkind to someone who has done nothing but try to contribute positively to our community," Mrs. Mitchell said firmly. "I suggest you remember that we are all judged by how we treat those who are trying to better themselves." Miss Crawford and her friends mumbled apologies and hurried away, leaving Kate and Lucy standing with Mrs. Mitchell on the wooden sidewalk. "Thank you," Kate said quietly. "No thanks necessary. I meant what I said. You've done nothing but good since you've been working with the church. Don't let small-minded people make you forget that." As they continued toward the boarding house, Lucy marveled at what had just happened. "She stood up for you. Mrs. Mitchell actually defended you against those girls." "I think," Kate said thoughtfully, "that's what happens when you prove yourself through actions rather than words. People begin to see who you really are instead of who they assumed you were." That evening, as Kate and Lucy sat in the boarding house parlor working on mending, Thomas arrived for his weekly calling hour. Eleanor had established strict rules about courtship in her establishment. Visitors were welcome in the parlor until 9 o'clock with appropriate supervision, but no private meetings were allowed. Thomas brought news that made Kate's heart soar. The bank clerk, James Morrison, had mentioned that his fiancée was finally arriving from Ohio and would need work to help support them while James saved for their own home. Mrs. Patterson had immediately thought of Lucy's sewing skills. "She's apparently quite accomplished with fine needlework," Thomas explained. "James showed me some samples of her embroidery work, and it's exceptional. Mrs. Patterson thinks Lucy could establish a small business taking in sewing and alterations for the ladies in town." Lucy's eyes grew wide with excitement. "My own business? But I don't have any customers, any reputation here." "You'd have Mrs. Patterson's recommendation," Kate pointed out. "And mine, and Mrs. Henderson's. That's enough to get you started." As the evening progressed, Kate found herself marveling at how much had changed in just 3 weeks. She had meaningful work, a respected place in the community, and a love that was growing stronger each day. Lucy had found her own path to redemption. Even the women who had initially been hostile were beginning to show grudging acceptance. "Thomas," she said as he prepared to leave, "do you ever think about what our life might look like a year from now?" He smiled, taking her hand briefly under Eleanor's watchful eye. "I think about it every day. I see us married, maybe living in a small house on the edge of town. I see you continuing your charitable work, becoming one of the respected women of the community. I see children, eventually, if we're blessed with them. And you're not worried about the talk, about the whispers that will probably never completely go away? Kate, some people will always find something to whisper about. But the people who matter, the people whose opinions actually count, they're judging you by who you are now, not who you were then. As Kate walked Thomas to the door and bid him good night under Mrs. Patterson's approving gaze, she felt the deep contentment that comes from a life lived with purpose and authenticity. The scared, desperate woman who had stepped off the stage in Millbrook 7 months ago seemed like a different person entirely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, new chances to help others as she had been helped. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth and security of her chosen family, Kate Walsh felt something she had almost given up believing in. She felt truly at home. Christmas Eve. 1887 snow had begun to fall over Millbrook just after noon, dusting. The wooden sidewalks and tin roofs with the soft white blanket transformed the dusty frontier town into something resembling a picture from a children's storybook. From the front window of Patterson's boarding house, Kate Walsh watched the flakes drift past the glass while she put the finishing touches on a pine garland she'd woven for the front door. 8 months had passed since that first night when Thomas Brennan had climbed the stairs to room 7 above the Silver Dollar, and the woman arranging evergreen boughs bore little resemblance to the desperate girl he'd found there. Kate's face had filled out. Her posture was straight and confident, and her eyes held a peace that came from knowing exactly who she was and where she belonged. "Kate, the Christmas pudding smells divine," called Eleanor Patterson from the kitchen doorway. At 71, Eleanor moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind remained sharp and her standards for the boarding house never wavered. She'd become something of a mother figure to Kate, offering guidance and protection with a fierce loyalty that had surprised them both. "Mrs. Henderson's recipe," Kate replied, hanging the garland with careful precision. "She insisted I learn it properly for the church Christmas dinner tomorrow." Eleanor smiled, watching Kate work. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Kate had not only proven herself invaluable in managing the boarding house, but had become one of the most respected women in Millbrook's charitable circles. Her work with the sick and struggling had earned her a reputation for compassion and practical wisdom that transcended her past. "There's someone here to see you," Eleanor said, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes twinkling with mischief. Kate turned to see Thomas standing in the parlor doorway, snowflakes still clinging to his dark hair, and a package wrapped in brown paper tucked under his arm. Her heart did the same little skip it had done every time she'd seen him for the past 8 months, and she suspected it always would. "Mr. Brennan," she said formally, aware that several of the boarding house residents were within earshot. "How lovely to see you on Christmas Eve, Miss Walsh." Thomas's eyes danced with the same barely contained joy she felt. "I was hoping you might have time for a brief walk. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Eleanor cleared her throat meaningfully. "I suppose a chaperoned walk would be appropriate, given the holiday. Lucy, would you mind accompanying them?" Lucy Morrison looked up from the embroidery hoop she'd been working on. In the months since leaving the Silver Dollar, she'd blossomed into a confident young businesswoman. Her sewing and alteration shop was thriving, and she'd recently announced her engagement to James Morrison, the bank clerk. Their wedding was planned for the spring, and Kate couldn't have been happier for her friend. "Of course," Lucy said, setting aside her needlework. "Just let me get my coat." The 3 of them stepped out into the gentle snowfall, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Main Street was busy despite the weather, with families making last-minute preparations for Christmas dinner and children playing in the accumulating snow. Several people called out Christmas greetings to Kate and Thomas as they passed, a level of acceptance and belonging that still sometimes caught Kate by surprise. They walked toward the small park where Kate and Thomas had spent many hours during their lengthy courtship. Eleanor Patterson might run a progressive boarding house, but she was strict about propriety, and most of their private conversations had taken place on public benches under the watchful eyes of the community. "Lucy," Thomas said as they reached the park, "I wonder if you might give Miss Walsh and me a few minutes of privacy. Perhaps you could sit on that bench there, where you can see us but not hear our conversation." Lucy's face broke into a knowing grin. "Of course, Mr. Brennan. I'll be right over there if you need me." As Lucy settled herself on a bench about 20 feet away, Thomas guided Kate to their favorite spot under the large oak tree. The branches were bare now, but Kate remembered the day 8 months ago when she'd sat here reading Jane Eyre, when Thomas had first begun to show her that her story didn't have to end in tragedy. "Kate," Thomas began, his voice unusually nervous, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you for quite some time." Kate's heart began to pound, but she kept her voice steady. "What is it, Thomas?" Instead of answering immediately, he handed her the wrapped package. "Open this first." Kate unwrapped the brown paper carefully, revealing a small wooden box carved with intricate flowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of blue velvet, was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen. A simple gold band set with a modest but perfect diamond that caught the winter light and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. "Thomas," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears. He dropped to one knee in the snow, taking her gloved hands in his. "Catherine Walsh, you are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've shown me what courage looks like, what redemption means, and what love can accomplish when it's built on respect and genuine partnership." Kate's tears were flowing freely now, but she didn't care who might see them. "I love everything about you," Thomas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I love your intelligence, your compassion, your ability to see hope where others see only despair. I love the way you read to children at Sunday school, the way you comfort the sick, the way you've turned Mrs. Patterson's boarding house into a real home for everyone who lives there." He paused, looking up at her with eyes that held their entire shared history, all the nights of honest conversation, all the challenges they'd faced together, all the quiet moments of growing love. "But most of all, I love the way you've never let your past define your future. You've shown me that people can change, that circumstances don't determine character, and that love can heal almost any wound if it's patient enough and strong enough." Kate could barely speak through her tears. "Thomas ... Will you marry me, Kate? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives? Will you help me build something beautiful together?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as snowflakes swirled around them. From her bench, Lucy applauded loudly, drawing the attention of other people in the park who began to cheer when they realized what they were witnessing. "When?" Kate asked when Thomas finally set her down. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow if you want. Next month, next year, I don't care as long as you're sure." Kate looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had saved her not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through the simple act of sitting with her in the darkness and reminding her that she was worth saving. "Spring," she said, "after Lucy's wedding. I want her to be my maid of honor, and I want time to plan something worthy of what we've built together. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Kate felt the familiar sense of unreality that had accompanied all the major turning points of her transformation. Was this really her life now? Was she really an engaged woman, respected in her community, surrounded by people who loved her for who she truly was? The boarding house was decorated for Christmas. When they returned, with candles in every window and the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air, Eleanor took one look at Kate's face and knew immediately what had happened. "Well," she demanded, her stern expression not quite hiding her delight. Kate held up her left hand, the diamond catching the lamplight and casting tiny rainbows on the wall. Eleanor's face broke into the widest smile Kate had ever seen from her. About time. I was beginning to think that boy would never work up the courage. The evening that followed was one of the happiest of Kate's life. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Millbrook's social circles, and a steady stream of well-wishers appeared at the boarding house door. Margaret Henderson arrived with a bottle of her late husband's best wine and a hug that conveyed her genuine joy. Mrs. Mitchell brought her entire family to offer congratulations. Even some of the women who had initially been cool toward Kate made the effort to call and wish her happiness. As the evening wound down and the last of the visitors departed, Kate found herself alone in the parlor with Eleanor and Lucy, 3 women who had become her chosen family during the most difficult period of her life. "I still can't quite believe it's real," Kate admitted, turning the ring on her finger and watching the light play across the diamond. "Believe it," Eleanor said firmly. "You've earned every bit of happiness that's coming your way." "We both have," Lucy added, looking at her own engagement ring. "A year ago, who would have thought we'd both be planning weddings?" Kate thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived in Millbrook, frightened, ashamed, convinced that her life was effectively over. That woman could never have imagined sitting in a respectable parlor, engaged to a good man, surrounded by friends who valued her for her character rather than judging her for her past. "You know what I think the secret was?" Kate said thoughtfully. "What?" both women asked. "Thomas taught me that I was worth saving, but more importantly, he taught me that I could save myself. He didn't rescue me, he just held the light while I found my own way back." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between real love and the fairy tale nonsense girls read about in novels. Real love doesn't sweep you off your feet. It helps you find your footing." Later that night, as Kate prepared for bed in her small room, she took out the leather-bound copy of Jane Eyre that Thomas had given her that first week. She'd read it countless times since then, finding new meaning in Charlotte Bronte's words. With each reading, she turned to the final pages, to the passage that had become her personal motto. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." Kate closed the book and set it on her nightstand, then walked to the window to look out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere out there was the building that had once housed the Silver Dollar Saloon. It had closed 6 months ago when Martha Goldstein decided to retire and move to California. The building now housed a millinery shop, and Kate sometimes wondered if the new owners had any idea of the transformation that had begun in that upstairs room. She thought about Martha sometimes, hoping the older woman had found some peace in her retirement. Martha had been the first person to tell Kate that she had choices, that her story wasn't finished being written. In many ways, Martha had been the one who planted the seed that Thomas's kindness had helped to grow. Kate touched the ring on her finger one more time, then settled into bed with a heart full of gratitude and anticipation. Tomorrow was Christmas, and in the spring, she would marry the man who had shown her that redemption was possible, that love could heal the deepest wounds, and that every person deserved a second chance. But more than that, she would marry him as an equal, not as a broken woman grateful for rescue, but as a strong, confident, whole person who had fought her way back to herself and emerged better for the struggle. The snow continued to fall outside her window, blanketing Millbrook in pristine white, and Kate Walsh fell asleep planning a future that was entirely her own creation. She had learned that the most powerful transformations didn't happen overnight through dramatic gestures, but slowly, quietly, through the accumulation of small acts of courage and kindness. Thomas Brennan had paid for her time, but never touched her, choosing instead to offer her something far more valuable, the chance to remember who she really was underneath all the pain and shame. And in saving herself with his support, Kate had discovered a truth that would guide her for the rest of her life, that everyone, no matter how far they've fallen, carries within them the capacity for redemption. All they need is someone willing to sit with them in the darkness and remind them that dawn always comes, if you're patient enough to wait for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.